The number on the scale the morning my wife left was 247 pounds. I remember it exactly. Not because I was watching it carefully that day. I had stopped weighing myself 6 months earlier. The way you stop checking a wound you've accepted is going to take the time it takes. I remember it because Cassandra told me. Standing in the doorway of our bathroom, with her overnight bag already in her hand and her car keys already in her other hand, she looked at the scale on the floor beside the shower and said, with the specific, final calmness of a woman who has rehearsed a conversation until it no longer frightens her, "You're 247 pounds, Daniel. You've been 247 pounds for 2 years, and I've spent 2 years waiting for you to do something about it." Then she left. I stood in the bathroom for a long time after I heard the front door close. I looked at the scale. I picked it up. I turned it over in my hands the way you turn over a piece of evidence you've been given, examining it, testing its weight, deciding what it actually means. Then I put it in the bin under the sink. Not in anger, not in denial. With the calm, deliberate intention of a man who has just been given the final piece of information he needed to confirm a decision he'd been working toward for 3 years. I didn't need the scale anymore. I already knew exactly what was happening inside my body. I had known for 37 months. I had the data. I had the research. I had the 340 pages of notes in the black moleskin notebook on my desk. 3 years of evenings and early mornings, of blood panels and cortisol curves and gut microbiome sequencing and circadian timing studies, all building toward a single, specific, scientifically validated answer to the question that the fitness industry had been answering incorrectly for 40 years. My wife left because she believed I lacked discipline. What I actually had was a $47 million company in the making. She just couldn't see it yet. What happened to my family didn't make headlines. It never does. But that doesn't mean it shouldn't be heard. Subscribe. We tell the stories that don't. Here's what Cassandra did not know the morning she picked up her bag and drove away. She did not know that the research I had been conducting for 37 months, the research she had described at her father's dinner table as Daniel's hobby, had, 8 weeks before she left, produced a validated clinical protocol that would become the foundation of the fastest-growing metabolic health company in the country. She did not know that Dr. Sarah Chin, my research partner, had that same week returned from a meeting with a supplement manufacturer and a venture capital contact in the city with a term sheet offering seed funding of $2.3 million, contingent on the clinical data we had already gathered. She did not know that the fitness industry her father had spent 30 years building a mid-tier gym empire in was about to be disrupted, specifically and precisely, by the science her husband had been developing in a converted spare bedroom while she told her family he lacked ambition. She did not know that in 14 months, the number on the scale would read 184 pounds. Not because I had found willpower I'd previously lacked. Not because I had finally listened to the advice her brother had been delivering with such confident generosity for 4 years, but because my own protocol had done precisely what 3 years of data said it would do. And that my body would be the proof of concept that every investor, every journalist, every fitness professional who saw me walk onto the keynote stage at the National Wellness Expo would look at and understand immediately. The fat husband who couldn't control himself had built the science that the fit brother-in-law couldn't replicate with his entire career. Cassandra left me at 247 pounds. She came back when the empire was worth $47 million. I had already decided what to do. But I want you to understand something before I tell you how it happened. Because this is not the story I thought I was living while I was living it. I was not a man running a long game, strategically enduring humiliation while he waited for his moment. I was a man who loved his wife and believed in his work and spent 3 years watching those two things come into irreconcilable conflict, trying to hold both of them together with the specific, exhausted patience of someone who keeps reinforcing a structure that isn't built right. The humiliation was real. The grief was real. The work was the only thing that felt like solid ground. This is the story of what happens when you build on solid ground long enough. Before I take you back to the beginning of this, I want to stop and ask where you're watching from tonight. These stories travel further than we ever expect, and it genuinely means everything to us to know who's out there. Drop your city or your country in the comments right now. We read every single one. And if you've ever been told that who you are right now isn't enough, if someone in your life has looked at what you're building and decided it doesn't count yet, this story is for you. Please consider liking this video and subscribing to the channel. Your support is what makes these stories possible. Every week, we're here. Now, let me take you back to the beginning. To a research biochemist named Daniel Marsh, a converted spare bedroom in a terraced house, and the 3 years that changed everything. I need to tell you about the man I was before the weight, before the work, before any of this. Because the version of me that Cassandra's family saw, the overweight, quiet, apparently unambitious husband parked at the corner of every family dinner, was not the full picture. It was one angle, from a specific and unflattering light, taken by people who had decided what they were looking at before they looked. I had been a biochemistry researcher since I was 22. Not a flashy career, not the kind of work that produces TED Talks or magazine profiles or dinner table conversations where people lean forward with interest. The kind of work that happens in the space between grant applications and published papers and the 3-year silence between a hypothesis and a proof. I had spent a decade studying metabolic biology, specifically the relationship between circadian rhythm disruption and metabolic dysfunction, which is the scientific way of saying I had spent 10 years studying why the human body, under certain conditions, stores fat with a biological efficiency that no amount of conventional calorie restriction can reliably overcome. I knew this problem intimately, not just professionally. I had been overweight since my late 20s. Not dramatically, not in the way that produces obvious concern, but consistently, stubbornly, despite every conventional intervention tried and abandoned. I had done the diets. I had done the gym. I had tracked calories with the obsessive precision of a man who trusts data more than he trusts feelings. And the data had consistently returned a result that the fitness industry's standard model could not explain. My body, under conventional protocols, reached a specific threshold and stopped. Every time. The same plateau. The same slow accumulation afterward. The same cycle that the industry had spent 40 years addressing with the same answer. More discipline, more deficit, more effort. Without ever questioning whether the answer was actually correct or simply the only answer available within the limits of the model. I had lived inside that cycle for 8 years. I understood it with the intimacy of someone who has inhabited a problem rather than merely studied it. And that intimacy, the specific, embodied knowledge of what it feels like to do everything the protocol prescribes and watch it not work. To be told repeatedly that the failure is yours when your data says clearly that the failure is structural. That intimacy was the engine of the research. I was not building a solution for a market. I was building a solution for myself. That is the kind of research that gets done properly. I tried to discuss this with Cassandra's brother Ryan once, in the first year of our marriage, when I had thought we might have the kind of relationship where honest exchange was possible. He had listened with the patient expression of a man who believes the answer is obvious and cannot quite understand why the other person doesn't see it. "You're not in enough of a caloric deficit," he had said. "It's just mathematics." I had nodded and said nothing, because explaining to a fitness influencer with 80,000 followers that the mathematics of caloric deficit does not account for circadian cortisol patterns, gut microbiome composition, or the specific adaptive thermogenesis response of a metabolically disrupted system would have taken longer than the conversation was worth, and would have changed nothing except the temperature of the room. But it was that conversation, that specific, cheerful, absolute certainty, that had sent me back to the spare bedroom and the moleskin notebook with a focus I had not previously had. Not anger, not wounded pride, something cleaner than that. The specific, energized focus of a researcher who has just confirmed, one more time, that the question he is working on has not yet been correctly answered by anyone currently in the room. I met Cassandra at a mutual friend's wedding when I was 31. She was everything I was not: physically disciplined, socially confident, radiantly sure of herself in the way of people who have always been told and have always believed that they are doing everything right. She was also genuinely warm, quick to laugh, interested in ideas in a way that her family was not. She asked me about my research at that wedding, and I explained it badly, and she listened well, and I loved her for that specific quality, the willingness to pay attention to something she didn't yet understand. It reminded me of the best kind of scientific mind, curious before it is critical. She had a quality in those early months that I have never stopped appreciating, even now, even in the context of everything that followed. She had the capacity to be surprised. Not everything delighted her. She was too precise for easy enthusiasm. But when something genuinely surprised her, she let it. She did not perform a smaller reaction to maintain control. She felt it fully. I loved that about her completely. We were married 14 months later. The weight had always been there, between us and her family. Not between us, or not at first. Cassandra, in the early years, maintained a public neutrality about it that I recognized as kindness. She did not push. She did not comment. She had her own relationship with food and exercise that was intense and structured and entirely her own, and she kept it that way. She ran 6 miles every other morning, ate with a precision that was neither anxious nor performative, but simply organized, treated her body as a system she maintained with specific intention. I respected it. I understood it. And she, in those first years, respected in return that my relationship with my own body was complicated and ongoing and did not need her supervision. What she could not keep entirely separate was her family's version of it, because her family did not maintain neutrality about anything. The Pemberton family's approach to ambiguity was to resolve it immediately into a verdict, and their approach to anything unresolved was to consider it a personal failure of the party concerned. In that family, nuance was not a virtue. It was a way of avoiding the obvious. And the obvious, where I was concerned, had been decided before the bread was passed at the first Sunday dinner. I was a man with a weight problem, a modest income, and a research project that had not yet produced visible results. That was the measure. The measure was fixed. And as the years passed and the research continued and the results remained invisible, because that is the nature of longitudinal biological research, because the work does not perform on demand for the people waiting to be impressed, the measure was confirmed, repeatedly, at every dinner table and in every phone call, and in the specific, accumulating silence of a wife who had begun to believe that her family's verdict was accurate. I knew this was happening. I could see it happening. And the tragedy of it, the specific, wrenching tragedy that I carried through those years without adequate language for it, was that I could not stop it without showing her the work before it was finished. And showing her the work before it was finished would have been a kind of dishonesty. Science does not perform at interim. It delivers at completion. To have said, "Trust me, I'm building something," without the completed thing to show her would have been asking for faith in place of evidence. And Cassandra Pemberton had been raised in a family that did not transact in faith. So I worked, and I waited. And the gap between what the work was and what it looked like grew wider. And her family's certainty grew louder. And the marriage grew quieter in the specific way that marriages grow quiet when two people are no longer saying the thing they most need to say. By the third year, I was saying everything with the notebook and nothing with my voice. The notebook was the most honest version of me. Cassandra had never read it. I had never offered it to her. That, in retrospect, was the failure of communication that I cannot fully assign to either of us. The failure that belonged to the specific, impossible condition of being a person whose most important work exists in a form that the people who love you cannot access until it is complete. I discovered the full shape of what was happening not in a single moment, but in an accumulation of them, small, precise, separately deniable, collectively undeniable. The way structural failure works, not as sudden catastrophe, but as the slow, incremental yielding of materials under a load they were never designed to carry. The clearest single moment came 14 months before Cassandra left. It was a Tuesday evening. She was on the phone with her mother in the kitchen while I was working in the spare bedroom, the door slightly open, the way it always was, because the ventilation in that room was poor and the equipment generated heat. I was not listening deliberately. My attention was on a dataset. Her voice came through the way background noise does when you are focused on something else, present but unprocessed, until it wasn't. "I'm not saying he's a bad person, Mum. I've never said that." A pause. "I'm saying there's a difference between a good person and a good husband. And a good husband, someone I can build a life with, takes care of himself, takes care of us. And Daniel just..." A longer pause. "He has his research, I know, but the research doesn't pay the mortgage. And I'm looking at him and I'm thinking, what is this? What are we building? Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like nothing." I stopped moving. I did not stop what I was doing. My hand was still on the keyboard, the cursor still blinking. But I stopped in the interior way. The way the body goes still when it has received information that requires the mind to fully stop and attend to it. "Dad's right," she said quietly. "I just hate that Dad's right." I sat in the spare bedroom for a very long time after she ended the call. My notebook was open on the desk. The data on the screen was 3 weeks from confirming the central hypothesis of the protocol. I looked at the data. I looked at the notebook. I looked at the open door through which my wife's voice had just told me, in the specific honesty that only exists when a person believes they are not being heard, that her father's judgment of me had become her own. The pain was real. I want to say that plainly. It was not the tolerable, manageable pain of a man who has known for a long time what the truth is and has made his peace with it. It was the sharp, sudden pain of confirmation, of finally hearing said aloud the thing you had been refusing to fully believe despite all the evidence. I closed the dataset. I opened the notebook. I picked up the pen. I worked until 2 a.m., not to escape the pain, not to distract myself from it, because the work was the only honest response I had. The work was the only language in which I could say what I needed to say, to the only audience that would ever fully understand it. That night I wrote, at the top of a fresh page in the notebook, a single question that I had been circling for months without directly stating. What if the body is not the problem? What if the protocol is? That question became the company. I spent years thinking no one would believe this story. Turns out, the right people always find it. If you're one of them, subscribe. There are more stories exactly like mine. I need to take you back through the years before that night. Before the notebook. Before the protocol. Before the morning she left. Because what happened to me over 4 years of marriage to Cassandra Pemberton was not one thing. It was a catalog. And the catalog matters because the specificity of it is what makes the rest of the story land with the weight it deserves. Victor Pemberton had made his money the old-fashioned way, not by doing anything particularly difficult, but by doing one uncomplicated thing for a very long time. He owned 11 mid-range gyms across 4 cities. Not elite facilities, not budget chains. The dependable middle tier, populated by the quietly motivated and the intermittently committed, staffed by young trainers who believed in what they were selling. He had built his business on a simple premise, that human beings felt bad about their bodies, would pay monthly to feel better about them, and would continue to pay even when they stopped attending, which most of them did. He understood his customers as people who lacked discipline. This was not unkind on his part. It was simply his model of humanity, constructed over 30 years of watching people fail to achieve the goals they had paid him to help them achieve. The problem in Victor Pemberton's model was always the person, never the program. I met him at the first family dinner Cassandra took me to. A Sunday roast at the Pemberton family home, 4 months into our relationship. He shook my hand, did the physical assessment that men like Victor Pemberton perform automatically on other men, and reached his verdict in approximately 4 seconds. He was not impolite, he was simply direct, in the way that people who believe they are being direct are almost always being something else. Over the starter, he asked about my work. I explained the research. He nodded slowly, in the way that indicates listening without interest. Then he said, "The fitness industry has been solving the obesity problem for 40 years. The answer is always the same. Less in, more out. The research is already done." I said that the research suggested the picture was more complex than that. He smiled, the smile of a man who has just been told by a junior employee that there might be a different way to run the department. "Results don't lie," he said, "and some results speak for themselves." He looked at me for one deliberate second. Then he passed the bread. Under the table, in the pocket of my jacket, I had the moleskin notebook. I had taken it with me the way you take a talisman, not for any practical purpose, but because it was the object that most completely represented the thing inside me that I could not yet show. I touched the spine of it through the fabric of my pocket, its worn leather cover, the weight of 3 months of work. I said nothing more about the research that evening, but I did not forget what he'd said. Ryan Pemberton was 26, managed his family gym's social media accounts alongside a personal fitness influencer channel that had grown to 80,000 followers on the strength of his physique, his confidence, and the specific, relentless positivity of a young man who has never in his life experienced a biological obstacle he could not overcome with more effort. He was genuinely, irritatingly fit. The kind of lean, structured physical condition that some people achieve through specific genetic advantage and then interpret as a moral achievement. He pulled me aside after Christmas dinner, genuinely helpfully, I believe, which is the worst kind of humiliation, the kind that cannot be assigned to malice and must simply be endured, and told me he wanted to help. He had, he said, put together a program. He showed me it on his phone. 12 weeks, 6 days a week, macros calculated, meal plan included. He had clearly spent time on it. He presented it with the earnest enthusiasm of a man who believes he is giving someone a gift. "The thing is, Daniel," he said, with the patient warmth of a man explaining something to a bright child who has simply not been told the answer yet. "Your body isn't broken. You just haven't given it the right inputs. The science is actually really simple." He said simple with such complete conviction that I understood he meant it. I looked at the program on his phone. 12 weeks of conventional caloric restriction and high-intensity interval training, structured with the confidence of a man who has never had reason to question whether the conventional approach works. It was, technically, correct. It was also, for a person with my specific metabolic profile, approximately as useful as a map drawn for a different city. "Thank you," I said. "I'll take a look at it." He clapped me on the shoulder. "You've got this, mate. It's just choices." Just choices. I went to the bathroom. I stood at the sink. I looked at my face in the mirror for a moment. Then I took the notebook out of my jacket pocket. I had begun carrying it everywhere by then, always. And I wrote 3 words on the page I had open. It is not choices. Then I went back to Christmas dinner. The third, Victor's proposition. Year 3, spring. The phone call came on a Thursday morning. Victor, calling from his office, with the tone of a man who has decided to do something generous and wants full credit for it. He had been thinking, he said, about my situation. He used the word situation in the way that people use it when they mean problem. He had enormous respect for academic work, he said, another word he used in a way that meant something different from its face value. But there came a point, he said, where a man needed to ask himself whether the thing he was doing was actually producing results. He had a position opening at one of his gyms, front of house management, client relationships, scheduling, some program coordination. A proper salary, stable hours, something that would let me contribute properly to the household while I figured out the next chapter. He did not say, "While you accept that the research isn't going anywhere." He didn't have to. "I know it's not what you imagined for yourself," he said, with the specific magnanimity of a man lowering a rope to someone he believes is drowning. "But it's honest work, and you'd be good at it. And frankly, Daniel, being around people who are committed to their physical health might be motivating, you know? Being around people committed to their physical health might be motivating." I held the phone against my ear and said nothing for a moment that lasted slightly too long. "I appreciate the thought, Victor," I said. "I'll think about it." I put the phone down. I went to the spare bedroom. I opened the notebook. I was 11 months from the clinical validation that would confirm the protocol worked. I was 11 months from the data that would make Ryan's 12-week program look like a compass in the age of GPS. I picked up the pen. I wrote for 4 hours without stopping. This one I have already told you part of. But there is a part I didn't tell you yet. The part that came after Cassandra said, "I hate that Dad's right." She said one more thing, in a lower voice, near the end of the call. I almost missed it. I was already back inside my own thoughts, already working through the implications of what I'd heard, already doing what I always do when the personal world becomes unbearable, retreating into the precision of the work. But I heard it. "Ryan said something the other day," she said, "that I keep thinking about. He said, 'You don't marry potential, Cass. You marry the person who's in front of you.' And I think he's right." A pause. "I think I married the idea of Daniel, and I'm not sure the man in front of me is the same idea." I sat with that for a long time. She had married an idea of me, and the man she could see, the man at 247 pounds, working in a spare bedroom, declining her father's job offers, failing to become what the room required, was not the idea she'd married. The idea had been of a man who might become something, The man in front of her had not yet become it. What she could not know was that the becoming was 3 months away. What I could not know was whether 3 months would be soon enough. Under the desk, in my coat pocket, the notebook. I reached down and held it the way you hold the thing that is most real to you when everything else feels like it is dissolving. Its weight, its worn cover, the 3 years of work inside it. You don't marry potential, Ryan had said. I wrote that in the notebook too. Under it I wrote, then they'll have to marry the result. I have already told you how it ended. The scale, the number, the overnight bag. What I have not told you is what happened in the 6 hours between the front door closing and my picking up the phone to call Sarah Chen. I sat in the kitchen for approximately 40 minutes. I made tea I didn't drink. I looked at the empty space on the hook by the door where Cassandra's keys had always hung. I thought about the specific quality of her absence, the way a room changes when a person who has always been in it is no longer going to be in it. Not empty, changed, a different geometry. I thought about whether I had done something wrong, not whether the marriage had failed, that was clear enough. Whether I had done something wrong, whether there was a version of those 4 years in which I had been more honest, earlier, about what I was building and why, and whether that version would have produced a different outcome. I sat with that for a long time. The honest answer was that I did not know. The honest answer was that some failures are not about what anyone did wrong, but about the distance between what 2 people needed and what was actually available. Cassandra needed a man whose results were already visible. I was a man whose results were 3 months from visible. That gap, 3 months, 90 days, the length of Ryan's fitness program, had cost me the marriage. I did not feel rage. I want to be clear about that. What I felt, sitting in that kitchen, was the specific and total grief of a man whose most private, sustained effort had been looked at and found insufficient by the person whose opinion he most needed to matter. I want to explain what the Circadian Metabolic Protocol actually is. Not the marketing version, not the language we eventually used in the app and the product line and the keynote presentations. The real version. Because the real version is the one that matters. The conventional fitness industry operates on a model that is approximately 40 years out of date. The model is calories in minus calories out equals weight change. Eat less, move more. Simple mathematics. Victor Pemberton's philosophy. Ryan Pemberton's 12-week program. The advice given by roughly 90% of the fitness professionals currently working. The model is not wrong. It is incomplete. And in science, incomplete is a different category of problem from wrong. Because incomplete leads you in the right direction just far enough to make you certain you understand the territory. Then it stops working and you don't know why. What the model misses is this. The human metabolism is not a constant. It is a biological system governed by circadian rhythms, the 24-hour internal clock that regulates, among several hundred other things, insulin sensitivity, cortisol production, leptin and ghrelin signaling, and the specific metabolic efficiency with which the body processes macronutrients at different times of day. These rhythms vary significantly between individuals. They are disrupted by stress, by sleep dysregulation, by certain medications, by the cumulative effect of years of eating patterns that conflict with the body's biological timing. In people with disrupted circadian metabolic rhythms, and there are significantly more of us than the fitness industry has historically been willing to acknowledge, conventional caloric restriction does not produce the expected result. The body, operating from a compromised biological baseline, adapts to the deficit by reducing metabolic rate. The person eats less, exercises more, and their body, in its biological wisdom, burns less. The plateau, the cycle. The 40-year mystery that the industry has solved by telling people they need more willpower. What my protocol does is different. It works with the circadian system rather than against it. Specifically timed nutrition, not just what you eat, but when, calibrated to the individual's cortisol curve and insulin sensitivity windows. Specific exercise sequencing that targets the periods of peak metabolic responsiveness. 3 supporting supplements, not stimulants, not appetite suppressants, but specific micronutrients that support the biological repair of circadian disruption. And a 14-day resetting protocol that I had spent 3 years developing, refining, and clinically validating across 47 subjects, including, most critically, myself. I had been living on my own protocol for 14 months when I walked onto the keynote stage at the National Wellness Expo. The number on the scale the morning of the Expo was 184 pounds. 63 pounds. 14 months. No surgery, no stimulants, no willpower war. Biology, correctly understood and correctly applied. I had the clinical data for all 47 subjects. I had the peer review. I had the published paper. I had the app with 340,000 paid subscribers at $12.99 a month, which, if you do the mathematics, is $4.4 million in monthly recurring revenue, which is the kind of number that a certain kind of man who runs 11 mid-range gyms tends to find clarifying. And I had the notebook, the original moleskin, worn and filled and held together by a rubber band because the spine had long since given out. Every hypothesis, every failed approach, every 2 a.m. data entry, every sentence I had written in that spare bedroom while my wife's family decided, in the next room, what kind of man I was. I was going to put it on the stage, not as theater, as documentation, as proof of the specific thing that could not be argued with, that the work had been there the whole time, that the answer had been being built while the questions were being asked, that the man they had measured and found insufficient had been, the entire time, in the process of building the measurement they had not yet thought to apply. Sarah Chen had the financial summary in the leather portfolio she would be carrying. Victor Pemberton had a booth at the Expo, as he did every year. His booth was in Hall B. The keynote stage was in the main arena. Then I picked up the notebook. I turned to the last entry, the one from 3 weeks earlier, when the final dataset had come back and I had known, with the complete certainty that only comes after 3 years of controlled, rigorous, self-critical research, that the protocol worked. I read it for a long time. Then I picked up the phone and called Sarah. "She's gone," I said. A pause. "I'm sorry, Daniel." "I know." "What do you need?" "I need you to tell me the term sheet is still on the table." Another pause. Then, "It's still on the table. I told them we'd confirm by Friday." "Confirm it," I said. "Are you sure you want to do this right now?" I looked at the notebook on the kitchen table, at the hook where the keys were no longer hanging, at the scale in the bathroom bin that I had put there 40 minutes ago. "The work was always going to be the answer," I said. "I just needed to know whether the marriage could survive waiting for it. Now I know." I heard Sarah exhale slowly. "Okay," she said. "I'll confirm it." We started the company the following week. Dr. Sarah Chen had been my research partner for 6 of the 7 years I had been working on metabolic science. And I want to tell you clearly what that means, because partner is a word that gets applied to professional relationships with varying degrees of accuracy. And in Sarah's case, it was entirely, completely accurate. She was 38, 2 years older than me, with a background in chronobiology that was more specialized and more rigorous than my own, and the specific quality of mind that good scientists develop when they have spent enough years being wrong, the capacity to hold a hypothesis with conviction and release it without grief when the data contradicts it. She had a husband who brought her coffee at 10 p.m. when she was still at the desk, and twin daughters who had grown up understanding that their mother's work was important in a way that was not abstract, but specific and ongoing. And she ran her professional life with the same precision she brought to the research. She had believed in the protocol from the first time I had walked her through the preliminary data, 3 years before the company existed. Not the credulous belief of someone who wants to be supportive, the precise, probing, increasingly convinced belief of a scientist who keeps looking for the error in your methodology and keeps failing to find it. She had managed the clinical trial. She had written the peer review paper. She had taken every meeting I could not take during the 14 months I was living on the protocol and rebuilding my professional life from scratch. She had told the investors what I had discovered and how, with the specific authority of a co-founder who was also the second best mind in the room. And she had done it without once performing the discovery as anything other than what it was: rigorous, documented, reproducible science. When Cassandra left, Sarah had been the first person I called. When the term sheet was confirmed, she was the first person I called. When the company reached a $10 million valuation 6 months into trading, I had called her at 7 a.m. and she had already been at her desk for an hour and had said, with the dry understatement that was her closest register to sentimentality, "I did say the data was good." On the morning of the Wellness Expo keynote, she arrived at my hotel room at 7:15 with the leather portfolio, a printed copy of the financial summary, and an advance copy of the Metabolic Science Journal feature that was going to publish the following week. A peer-reviewed paper on the protocol's clinical results. First author, Dr. Sarah Chen. Second author, Dr. Daniel Marsh. She put the portfolio on the desk. She looked at me. She looked at me the way she always looked at me when something significant was about to happen, and she wanted to mark it properly. Not with ceremony, but with full attention. "How are you?" she asked. I thought about that honestly. "Ready," I said. She nodded. "Victor Pemberton's booth is in Hall B. Registration shows him arriving at 9. "I know." "His booth is directly adjacent to the main arena entrance. He will walk past the signage for the keynote on his way in." I had not arranged this. The Expo's logistics had arranged it. The universe, as it occasionally does, had simply organized itself helpfully. "His daughter," Sarah began. "Not registered," I said. "I checked." "Okay." She picked up her coffee. "Then let's make it about the work." "It was always about the work," I said. She smiled, the rare, full smile that meant she agreed completely. It was always about the work. The National Wellness Expo was the largest annual gathering in the fitness and health industry. 3 days, 4,000 attendees, the full spectrum of the sector, from gym chains to supplement brands to clinical nutrition practices to the increasingly significant digital health space. It was the event at which the industry took its own temperature, measured its own trends, assessed its own direction. Victor Pemberton attended every year. His booth promoted his gym chain, distributed free trials, collected leads. He was, in the landscape of the Expo, a fixture, recognizable, respected in the conventional sense, a man whose presence confirmed that he was still part of the industry's established order. I had been given the keynote slot because Circadian Labs had, in 18 months of trading, become the Expo's most discussed company. Not through advertising. We had not spent significantly on advertising. Through the data, through the peer review, through the 340,000 people using the app whose results were producing the kind of testimonial volume that no marketing budget can manufacture. We had been invited to present the science formally to an audience of industry professionals for the first time. I had accepted the invitation 3 months earlier. I had told Sarah. I had told Daniel Reese, who was now on our advisory board. I had told no one else. I want to be precise about the preparations I made because precision matters here. I had the notebook, the original moleskin, rubber-banded, worn, in the inside pocket of my jacket. I had carried it for 3 years, and I was going to carry it onto the keynote stage and place it on the podium. Not as theater, as documentation. Sarah had the leather portfolio with the financial summary. $47 million company valuation, 18 months from inception, 43 employees, 340,000 app subscribers, 4 supplement products, a clinical certification program being adopted by 11 university health departments. Each number specific, verifiable, documented.
The slide deck was clean. White background, black type, the Circadian Labs logo, a simple waveform representing the circadian curve in the top corner. Data only. No inspirational photography, no lifestyle imagery, just the numbers and the science, in the clean, unadorned language of people who trust the work to speak without decoration. I had arranged one additional thing. On the final slide of the presentation, after the clinical data, after the business metrics, after the peer review citation, I had placed a single before and after comparison. Not mine. The aggregate of all 47 clinical subjects with individual data points visible. But at the center, clearly marked, the data point that was my own. Month 0. 247 pounds, fasting insulin elevated, cortisol curve disrupted, sleep architecture fragmented. Month 14. 184 pounds, all biomarkers normalized, circadian rhythm restored, metabolic rate increased by 17%. No photograph, just the data. I did not need a photograph. I was going to walk onto that stage and the data would be in the room with me, in the body I was walking in, and anyone who had known me before would understand what they were looking at without needing it explained. I went to bed at 10:30 the night before the keynote. I slept well, better than I had slept in 4 years, which was, in its own way, a data point. I still think about whether I did the right thing. Maybe you do too after watching this. That question, the next story answers it differently than you'd expect. The main arena of the Expo held approximately 800 people for the keynote sessions. By the time I arrived backstage at 9:45, the room was already 3/4 full. I could hear the ambient sound of a professional audience settling, the specific hum of people who attend these events with purpose, who have allocated the time deliberately and intend to use it. I was wearing a suit I had bought 6 months earlier, when it had become clear that the body I was now living in was not returning to its previous dimensions. Dark navy, well-fitted, not flashy, not a performance of a rival, simply appropriate. A man dressed for the room he was actually in, rather than performing a version of himself for an audience. I had the notebook in my inside pocket. I stood backstage and looked through the gap in the curtain at the room. I found Victor Pemberton in approximately 40 seconds. He was in the 3rd row from the front, left of center, a position that told me he had arrived early enough to choose it, which meant he had come to see the keynote specifically. He had his conference lanyard and his Expo program. He was speaking to the man beside him, another gym chain operator I vaguely recognized. He looked well, the groomed, vigorous appearance of a man in his mid-60s who has spent his entire adult life in the fitness industry and wears his physical condition the way a tailor wears a well-made suit, as evidence
of his professional credentials. He had not yet registered me on the program. I knew this because his body language was completely relaxed, the comfort of a man who has come to observe rather than to be surprised. I watched him for a moment. I thought about the phone call. Being around people committed to their physical health might be motivating. The word situation, the smile that preceded the bread passing, the 30 years of an industry built on the premise that the problem is always the person. I thought about Ryan Pemberton's 12-week program and the word simple and the hand on my shoulder. I thought about Cassandra saying, "I hate that Dad's right." I thought about the notebook in my pocket and the 14 months of waking up every morning and following the protocol precisely. Not because I was disciplined, not because I had finally found the willpower I had allegedly always lacked, but because I had finally given my body the correct instructions, and my body had done what bodies do when you give them correct instructions. It had performed exactly as the biology predicted. I touched the notebook through my jacket. Then I heard my name from the stage manager, and I walked out. The applause when I walked to the podium was professional and warm. The applause of an audience that has read the briefing and is prepared to be impressed. I let it settle. I stood at the podium and I looked at the room and I took one breath and I began. Good morning. I want to start with a number. 247. Silence. That was my weight in pounds at the start of the clinical process I'm going to present to you today. I'm telling you this because I'm the 48th data point in our trial. I'm telling you because I think it matters, when you hear the science, to know that the scientist was also the subject, that the protocol was not designed in comfort but in necessity, that I built this because I needed it to work, and because I had spent a decade watching the conventional model fail the people it was supposed to help. I paused. I looked at the third row. Victor Pemberton was very still. I also want to acknowledge the professionals in this room who have spent their careers in this industry. What I'm about to show you is not an argument against effort. It is not permission to be sedentary. It is a correction to an incomplete model. And corrections in science are not criticisms. They are the process. I clicked to the first slide, the cortisol curve, the circadian metabolic window, the 17% variation in metabolic efficiency between peak and trough periods of the individual circadian cycle. I walked through the science with the unhurried, specific precision of a man who has explained these concepts hundreds of times and has no need to perform certainty because the certainty is structural, built into the data, load-bearing. The room was completely focused. This is the specific quality of attention that good science produces in a professional audience. Not enthusiasm, but attention. The leaning forward stillness of people who are following something with full concentration. Victor Pemberton was leaning forward. I showed the clinical results. 48 subjects. Average weight change over 14 months. 51 pounds. Average metabolic rate improvement, 14%. Average biomarker normalization rate, 83% across the panel. 0 adverse events. Peer-reviewed, published, available. I showed the business metrics, not to brag, to demonstrate market validation. 340,000 paid subscribers in 18 months. 4 supplement products with combined monthly revenue of $1.8 million. A certification program being adopted by university health departments. Total company valuation, most recent assessment, $47 million. I let that number sit in the room for 3 seconds. Then I took the notebook out of my inside jacket pocket. I held it up. Not dramatically, simply. The way you hold up a piece of evidence when the evidence is the point. This is the notebook I used for the first 3 years of this research. Every hypothesis, every failed approach, every data point from my own body. Every night I worked past midnight in a spare bedroom while the people around me, people who meant well, people who were using the best information they had, decided that the reason this wasn't working was me. I placed it on the podium. It wasn't me. It was the protocol. And that distinction between a flawed person and an incomplete model is what this company is built on. I looked directly at Victor Pemberton. He was looking directly at me. And here is what I want to tell you about that moment, because it is the truest thing in the whole story. I did not feel triumphant. I want to be honest about that with the same honesty I have tried to bring to everything else. What I felt, standing at that podium, looking at the man who had offered me a front-of-house management position at one of his gyms, was something unexpected. I felt sad. Not for him, for the years. For the 4 years of a marriage that had not survived the gap between what the work was and what it looked like from the outside. For the specific, irreversible cost of being misread by people whose reading of you had mattered. The triumph was real. The data was real. The company was real. And none of it gave me back what it had cost to build it. He did not feel nothing, the protagonist. He felt everything. Grief and vindication and relief and the specific, quiet sorrow of a man who has proven his point to an audience that no longer has the power to wound him, and has discovered that proving it does not feel the way he imagined. I picked up the moleskin. I put it back in my pocket. "The full research paper is in your conference packs," I said. "I'm happy to take questions." The room applauded. Standing, from the front, then the middle, then the whole room. 800 professionals who had just watched a 48 data point peer-reviewed clinical result be delivered by the data point standing in front of them. Victor Pemberton stood with them. He had no choice. The room was standing, and he was in the 3rd row, and to remain seated would have been a visible statement. He stood. He clapped. He looked at me with an expression I had never seen on his face before, and that I can only describe as the expression of a man who has spent 30 years operating from a model and has just watched that model fail in front of 800 of his peers. Not collapse, not disgrace, simply failure. The quiet, irrefutable kind. After the keynote, Sarah found me backstage. She handed me a water and said nothing for a moment. Then, 47 million in 18 months. Your notebook's on the podium. I had left it there, deliberately. "Leave it," I said. She looked at me carefully. "You okay?" "Yes," I said, and I was. Not happy, not triumphant, but okay. Genuinely, specifically, structurally okay. "Let's go do the signings." Victor Pemberton found me an hour later, near the Circadian Labs booth. He came alone, without his associate, without his lanyard and program, as though he had left the professional apparatus of the Expo behind deliberately, to come to this conversation as a man rather than as a brand. He was not graceful about it. He is not, in his nature, a graceful man. But he was honest. "I underestimated you," he said, simply, without the qualifying smile. "I owe you an apology." I looked at him for a moment. "I know," I said. "Thank you for saying it." He nodded once. He extended his hand. I shook it. He held it for a beat longer than usual, not the measuring handshake of the first dinner, but the grip of a man who is trying to communicate something he does not have the vocabulary to say directly. Then he walked away. I watched him go. I thought about the spare bedroom, the notebook, the front-of-house management position, the specific weight of being around people committed to their physical health might be motivating. I did not feel bitter. I felt finished. Not with the work, never with the work. With the part of the story that had been about them. What happened after the Expo moved with the logical speed of a market that has been waiting for a correction? Victor Pemberton's gym chain reported a 14% drop in new memberships in the 6 months following the Expo. Not because of anything I had done, because the Circadian Labs app had, in the same period, been featured in 4 major health publications, recommended by 2 television doctors, and adopted by a corporate wellness program serving 60,000 employees. The market had received new information and was adjusting. His model, less in, more out, the problem is always the person, was not destroyed. But it was no longer unchallenged. And in the fitness industry, unchallenged is a significant portion of the value. Ryan Pemberton's influencer channel plateaued at 81,000 followers in the 12 months following the Expo. He released a video responding, implicitly, to the Circadian Labs science, a 20-minute explanation of why conventional caloric restriction worked and why the new protocols were unnecessary for the motivated individual. It performed below his average. The comments were divided in a way that his comments had never previously been divided. He did not post about metabolic science again. I do not take satisfaction in either of these outcomes. I want to say that clearly. They were not engineered, and they were not deserved in the punitive sense. Both men had operated from the best model available to them, and it was not their fault that the model was incomplete. What was incomplete was the science, not the character, and the science had now been corrected. Cassandra reached out 6 weeks after the Expo, a text message, not a call. She said she had watched the keynote video. It had been recorded and posted by the Expo organizers and had reached 2.3 million views, which I had not expected and which had produced a secondary wave of press coverage that Sarah and I were still managing. She said she was proud of me. She said she wanted to talk. I sat with the message for a long time. Then I called Daniel Reese, not the solicitor, my friend, who had, in the 18 months since the company began, become the person I spoke to most honestly about the things that mattered. "She's texted," I said. A pause. "What are you going to do?" I thought about the bathroom, the scale, the specific calm of a woman who has rehearsed what she needs to say, the overnight bag, the hook by the door with no keys on it. I thought about the spare bedroom and the notebook and the 2 a.m. entries and the 14 months of following my own protocol and watching my body do what I had always known it would do if given the right information. I thought about what I had built in the silence after she left. "I'm not going to text back," I said. Another pause. "Are you sure?" "I built this without her," I said, not to prove anything to her, because it was the work and the work needed doing. And I'm proud of what I built, and I want to protect it. Protect it from what? From becoming about her, I said. It was never about her. I don't want to make it about her now. Daniel was quiet for a moment. Then, "I think that's right." "I think so too," I said. I did not reply to the text. The letter came 4 months later. Not a text, a letter, handwritten on plain notepaper. Cassandra's careful, slightly formal handwriting that I had read on grocery lists and birthday cards, and the one note she had left on the kitchen counter the morning after our first argument, which had said simply, "I'm sorry for last night, and I love you," and which I had kept in my desk drawer for 3 years. She said she was not writing to ask for anything. She said that she had spent the months since the Expo in a process she found difficult to describe, but felt obligated to attempt. She had watched the keynote. She had read the peer review paper, had read it properly, not skimmed it. She had spent time, she said, trying to understand not just what I had built, but what it meant that she had been in the next room while I was building it and had not been able to see it. She said she had talked to a therapist, specifically about her father's model of worth, the way it had been installed in her, unchallenged, from childhood, and the way it had functioned as a lens she had applied to everything, including me, without recognizing it as a lens at all. She said she understood, now, the difference between a man lacking ambition and a man building something she did not have the framework to recognize. She said she had not stayed in the marriage because she believed in me fully. She had stayed, she said, longer than she should have on the wrong terms. Not believing, not trusting, waiting for the visible result rather than doing the harder thing of trusting the invisible work. She had not left because she stopped loving me. She had left because she had taken her father's measuring tape and applied it to a man whose dimensions required a different instrument entirely. "I measured you wrong," she wrote. "I'm not saying this to ask anything. I'm saying it because you deserved to be measured correctly, and I failed at that. And I think I needed you to know that I understand that now. Not because it changes anything, but because you were worth more than the measure I gave you. I hope the work keeps going. It deserves to." She signed it with her first name. I read the letter twice. I sat at the desk in the study of the house I had bought with the first significant draw from the company. Not a mansion, not a performance of a rival, but a proper house with a proper study, and a window that looks out over a garden I am slowly learning to maintain. And I read the letter and felt the last of the weight I had been carrying release from somewhere in my chest, where it had been held very quietly for a very long time. Not enough to open a door. The door was closed, and it was right that it was closed. But enough to understand, completely and without residue, that the marriage had been a real thing, and its failure had been a real loss, and the woman who had left me at 247 pounds was not a villain, and had not been a villain, only a person who had learned to see the wrong things, and had not yet unlearned it in time. I folded the letter. I put it in the desk drawer. Then I went back to work. I am 37 years old. I run a company with 43 employees, a peer-reviewed protocol, a product line, an app used by 340,000 people to understand their own biology better than the fitness industry ever helped them to. Sarah Chen is my partner. We are working on the second clinical paper, the cortisol cycling study that will extend the protocol's evidence base into the clinical treatment of metabolic syndrome. I find the work as interesting now as I did in the spare bedroom, which tells me something about where to keep putting the time. I weigh 184 pounds. Not because I am disciplined, because I understand my own biology and I give it what it needs. That distinction, the one that sounds small but is in fact the foundation of everything, is what the company was built on and what I carry with me everywhere now, in the place where the notebook used to be. The notebook is framed on the wall of my study between the desk and the window. Every page visible in a spread across 4 panels. The data, the failed approaches, the 2 a.m. entries, the morning she left, and the question I wrote that became the company. What if the body is not the problem? What if the protocol is? My father built things with his hands. I built things with data. The result is the same. Something in the world that was not there before, that functions correctly, that will help the people it was designed for. That is the only measure I have ever needed. I want to say something directly to you, and I want to say it as plainly as Daniel would say it, in the register he uses when the data is clean and the conclusion is unavoidable. The fitness industry has been telling you a story for 40 years. The story is, you know what to do. You just lack the discipline to do it. The failure is yours. The body is a reflection of your character, and if the body is not what you want it to be, the character requires improvement. Get up earlier. Try harder. Want it more. The model is correct. The problem is you. That story is incomplete, and in the specific way of incomplete models, it has done real damage to real people in real bodies who tried the correct protocol for the wrong biology and concluded from the failure that the failure was them. Who went to gyms run by men like Victor Pemberton and received programs designed by people like Ryan and did everything they were told and watched it not work and absorbed quietly over years the implication that this meant something about who they were. It did not mean anything about who they were. It meant the model was incomplete. But I want to extend this beyond the biological. Because Daniel's story is not, at its core, a story about metabolism. It is a story about the specific courage required to keep building something invisible to the people who matter most to you, for the time it takes to build it correctly, without the validation that would make the building easier. That courage is not glamorous. It does not produce visible results on the timeline that other people find acceptable. It lives in spare bedrooms and 2 a.m. notebook entries, and the specific, private discipline of a man who knows what he is building, even when no one else can see it. It does not announce itself. It does not ask for recognition. It simply continues, because the work is the work, and the work has its own timeline, and that timeline does not adjust for the comfort of the audience. The people who dismissed Daniel were not cruel. They were operating from the best model available to them. Victor believed in his framework. Ryan believed in his. Cassandra, at the end, believed what the people she trusted most had told her to believe. None of them were measuring with malice. They were measuring with the only instrument they had. The problem was the instrument. You may be living inside someone else's inadequate instrument right now. Someone whose motto of worth, of ambition, of what a good outcome looks like and how long it should take to arrive. Someone whose motto has been applied to you and found you lacking. And you have been carrying that finding, living inside it, wondering whether they are right. They are not right. They are incomplete. You know what you are building. You know the quality of the work. You know the 2 a.m. entries that nobody else has read. You know the data that is 3 months from confirming what you have always believed. You know the specific, unglamorous, entirely private discipline of staying in the spare bedroom when the rest of the world has decided there is nothing worth staying for. That knowledge is yours. Nobody can take it. Nobody's departure, nobody's dinner table verdict, nobody's casually devastating certainty about your limitations has the authority to reach into the work and make it less true. Build it anyway. The data will be available when it is ready. Do you think Daniel was right to not reply to Cassandra? Or did she deserve at least a conversation after the letter? Tell me in the comments. I mean it. Some of the most thoughtful responses we get are to questions like this one. We read them all. And if this story reached something real in you tonight, please give it a like and subscribe to the channel. Every single person who subscribes makes these stories possible to keep telling. We'll see you next time.